Hello and welcome back to Council Island for another marathon public hearing. Like I said last time, these are kind of our Olympics. We love watching public hearings and seeing what is being said at council, what is being said to council, and where all of these councillors are kind of sitting. And we have a very fresh council, and this is very early in their term. So I think this is going to be telling for us to see how this performance is going to continue here. I want to get first impressions. Did anybody have any favorite speakers? We'll start with Biz. Any favorites from yesterday?
For sure. I think somebody's gonna have to eventually say Walcott, so I'm actually go with my girl Gianna. Walcott's a hard act to follow, and I think she did a really great job and brought up a lot of things that needed to be part of the conversation that a lot of people don't consider so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hanita was actually my favorite speaker, but she's here right now. So we'll hear, what was your favorite speaker, Hanita?
Well, I think yes, Walcott, brilliant. But the my other favorite speakers, I've got two. I Chloe and Abby on panel 14.
Yeah,
They were
really,
young
really
people
solid.
who made it very clear to City Council what how detrimental going back on rezoning would be to young people in the city.
Yeah, and I think that, the amount of young people who come out and speak in favor of this, and it was shown that by the city's own polling data, young people overwhelmingly are in favor of the rezoning and support this change, which was interesting because later on in the hearing, there was a gentleman who was against or in favor of the repeal of the rezoning. And he said maybe future generations will choose differently, but right now we're choosing this. And I'm thinking, well, future generations are choosing. Future generations are saying this is what they want. And so really we have the option to do it today or just do it with the next council. And it's kind of an inevitability because of that, right? Uh, Hanita, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, but we end up screwing over young people if we don't do it now. So
Right, exactly, right? Like this, doing it now makes the change go slower. I was watching this morning's hearing while I was, before getting on here with you guys, and a woman was talking about, we're going through growing pains. Like this is normal. We're becoming a big city. We're becoming a real city. And and it's normal to have frustrations through that process, but we have to figure out how to actually, get our act together and be able to behave like a big city. And so we can either make that change now, and it'll feel a little slower, a little frustrating, or we can wait and let the growing pains be really, really hard for us later on. Denis, do you have a favorite speaker from yesterday's performance?
Yeah, I do. I'll just point out that we've already waited, and that's why the growing pains are painful, right? Some of these neighborhoods should have turned over 20 years ago, and they didn't because of restrictive zoning. And now people are sort of used to something that in a more open market would just never have. You would never have a 50-foot wide bungalow next to a C train station 12 minutes from downtown,
Yeah.
unless it was owned by a millionaire who had renovated it, right? Like that's just not an economically efficient use of the land. And unless the landowner was willing to kind of like eat that economic inefficiency in by foregoing, like $1 million or something themselves, the market would have naturally put it to more efficient uses. So, and I think that's actually a big, and I want to write an article on that after this. Throughout this hearing, as I've been tracking things, and sort of been going like, oh, you know what? Like I can put one sentence now as I continue to take my notes and try to track what's going on, but actually this deserves 3,000 words to kind of like unpack. And that's one of the things that I think is going to be important to talk about is how part of the growing pains we're seeing now is 30 years of failure of leadership on the part of Calgary City Council and the provincial government, frankly, with a poorly managed MGA. And so then we sort of have a point on that front. But they go the wrong direction with it. They're like, well, it's painful now, So let's not do it and make it more even like triply painful in 30 years.
Yeah.
In terms of my favorite speaker is Ashish Panda. I believe it's his first time speaking at council. He got like randomly tripped up by the mayor on a procedural thing, and he kind of continued flawlessly anyway. He got basically, some people are toxic and will like say terrible things to councillors, and so the mayor's been trying to like get that under control by saying, okay, look, you can't name councillors directly, right? Because some people will just be really, really vicious at these things.
Yeah.
And the mayor has the authority to do that because there are some rules about parliamentary privilege, and you address the chair, right? Like you'll notice the professionals when they go in, oh, remarks are addressed to the chair. That's them. That's not some weird thing they're doing. That's them actually following the rules of what's supposed to be going on in the chamber. So Ashish got, like, he was just saying, oh, like, hi to my local councillor. And then the mayor's like, no, none of that. Which, I think Mayor Farkas is doing the right thing about trying to get, introduce more civility into the proceedings. I would be harsher and broader in terms of civility. There's some serious lack of civility going on. But Ashish went on and delivered an excellent presentation anyway. His slides are available online. I've got a link to them in the Substack roll-up, and you can see his comments in the review. And he just did he had a good deck, and he just did delivered a really clear and cogent presentation that outlined the consequences and trade-offs of the decision, and said, like, look, I want you to build more housing because I think that's what's right for the city.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll note on the consequences of how we do or do not build housing. What I always tell people is we basically have three paths. We have three routes that our communities can take as they age. We can decide that there will be nothing built other than single detached homes, and that we would like every single detached home that gets torn down, because that's going to happen. Houses are old. There's a couple near me in Acadia that are just as tall as any RCG townhouse build, that are single detached, that replaced old 1960s bungalows. We can either enforce that and make sure that we only permit single detached homes, and then the value of the homes will increase, and the people who were previously able to afford in a working class neighborhood like this will no longer be able to afford to live there, right? I think North Glenmore is a great example of this, where the houses there have gotten more and more expensive and bigger and bigger and bigger because they disallowed so much development. Of course, there's like a weird mix, but the people who live in the big houses only want other big houses there. Not all of them, but a lot of the ones that I knocked during the election last year. And so we can have that, or by preventing development, by saying you can only build single detached homes here, we can make it so that when the houses fall apart, there's nobody coming in to replace them. There's nobody coming in to build a new, fresh house. And then you have urban blight. You have houses that fall apart. You have fewer population living there. Services pull out. Businesses pull out. And you have a decline similar to what people might see in 1990s Detroit, right? Or we can allow for some slow incremental change, some small developments. Suddenly a lot of people are in favor of backyard suites and basement suites. I've loved hearing all the people who are like, just do that, that's fine, that's perfect. And
except Chabot, he's like, actually some people in my neighborhood would not like this.
Do you remember a couple years ago there was the guy who said that every garage suite comes with binoculars? Do you remember that? That was a thing somebody said a couple years ago. Now me and my siblings, every time we drive past a place with a garage suite, we say, watch out, they've got binoculars. So those are like the options, right? You can have urban blight, you can make your community too expensive to live in, or you can allow for some slow, gradual change. Those are kind of the options that we're looking at here, right? I don't know what you guys would prefer, but I know my preference is some slow incremental change. Support small businesses, support the services that we have. And DJ Kelly has done a good job of saying, like, how do we get back to your peak population? Like, what version of Lakeview are you looking for? How do you want to get back there? So maybe talking a little bit about some of the comments in favor of rezoning. Hanita, do you have any thoughts on some of the comments that have been given in favor of the repeal? Sorry, of the rezoning.
Well, if I'm following you, I mean, one of the big things that people are all up in arms about is parking. And it's so again, I live in Kelvin Grove, and this community was built in the 50s. And we used to do these kind of community spring gatherings. And so, it'd be like an Earl Grey golf course or at some carriage house or something. And then you'd get to meet neighbors that you maybe hadn't met before. And I remember there was a family, and their kids are probably in their 30s now, maybe even older. And they were saying, there was a time when this community was packed with cars. You could not find street parking because every family, because a lot of houses here are 5-bedroom houses, so parents, 4 kids, because the streets were packed because everybody had their own car. It wasn't other people coming in and parking. It was just the neighborhood itself. It was that packed. And now, of course, people live in these same houses. There's some people that have that size of family, but it's not like that anymore. People obviously can't afford to buy a car for all 6 family members. And so I haven't seen that. And if it happened again, I think, again, people would lose their minds. People are like, I need to have my right to park on the street and do all of that kind of stuff. And again, I think about my brother's place, which costs a gazillion dollars in London, does not have its own driveway. You cannot park your car in it. There is some available street parking. You pay for it. And those communities are no less desirable. And I don't know, maybe they're even more desirable. But all of these things that people are complaining about, for cities that have more experience than us, they are not a big deal. Now, do we need better public transportation? 100%. Because you can't have one without the other. But the whole thing that you cannot possibly build more density because you don't have enough parking for every single unit or every single person who's coming to live in it, that's a red herring.
I think we have to be super careful about this conversation too, especially with parking. As Walcott said yesterday, it's something like 90% of people don't even care about parking. Like it's a kind of a non-issue. It's statistically insignificant that it tends to come up in public hearings because it's a very constrained representation.
Yeah.
But in this conversation, we're talking about parking. The land use bylaw cannot regulate street parking. It can only regulate on-site parking, which we know because we've done the studies on it. There's reports out there that the communities that are receiving redevelopment have enough on-site parking. People just don't use it. So, do we want to force developers to continue building more of their lot as housing for cars instead of housing for people, just for them to not use it? Because what are we going to do? Show up with a gun? Right? If you want to regulate street parking, you do that by pricing it fairly. There's no, if then people say, oh, I should probably use my garage. That's the problem. That's the root of the problem, is that not enough people are using their garages, so why would we force people to then build more of them? Force them, right? Because that's a minimum parking requirement.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Denis, you've got something?
Yeah, I mean, the parking thing is an interesting one, and there's a great conversation to be had about how to efficiently manage parking and how to efficiently manage public land resources, which is what the street parking is. That Biz was, I think Biz is start on that. That's like the right way to think about it. But there's another point about hypocrisy that I want to make here, which is just that. You can be a communist if you want to, but I object to people who are parking communists and aren't also, housing communists, right? If you're going to be a communist and say the taxpayer should pay for my parking, I want free, unlimited parking, and the taxpayer pays for it, then why doesn't the person who has no house get to say, well, I want a free roof over my head, and the taxpayer should pay for it? So I would like people to either be communists or not be communists. And if you want to be a communist, that's okay. We can have that discussion. But what I can't accept is somebody who's like, we're going to have communism and free stuff for me, and other people can rot in the gutter. That's, uh, uh, woe to ye, Pharisees and hypocrites. I'm not really religious, but like, I think Jesus had it right there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and like it's kind of like what we talked about yesterday about this being a test of your values, and this being a test of what do you really believe and what do you really support and want to see in your city. Go ahead, Hanita.
That is sort of the chasm that I see in these hearings, not just this one, but the one before. So you've got, these wealthy, mostly white, older property owners who talk about property values and investment and all of that kind of stuff and their house or homes and multiples. And then you see young people who say they don't have a home, they can't afford a home, and then they almost always inevitably say something that they worry about other people who don't have a home. So it just is this gulf in empathy and compassion and care that I find maybe the most disturbing when I go to city council. It fits with your comment from earlier, Denise. Like it's just that I feel is like the biggest. Like it's just such a. We're talking about two different things and two different visions for the city, and young people know where it's at, man.
Yeah, well, it's, who do we prioritize and how do we prioritize those needs? I had during the election someone come up to me and say, please, if you're elected, don't build housing near transit stations, which I was shocked by because this was a person who lived in a multi-million dollar home, who was very well off. And I thought, wait a second, isn't this where, people in the more affluent communities are always saying we should build housing? Mostly because it's away from them. It's out of sight, out of mind, right? And I said, what? I said, why don't build it near transit? And she says, well, it just attracts the wrong type of person. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I don't know what the wrong type of person is in her mind. I didn't ask. But whatever she considers to be the wrong type of person exists. They exist. And they are going to need some place to live. And if they don't have some place to live, they will be camping in your backyard because they got to go somewhere. People need a roof over their head. This is basic human rights, right? Go ahead, Anita.
Well, it seems to me that in most cases, the person they don't want is anyone who is of a lower socioeconomic status than they are. So in an upper middle class neighborhood, it's anyone that's slightly lower, and it doesn't matter where in which neighborhood it is. It's just it can't be anything lower than whatever they perceive that neighborhood to be. It's very disturbing.
Which we're all more likely to go down than to go up. I think about a lot of people who, look at homeless people with disgust. And it's like we're all close to being homeless. Like that could happen to any of us. It really could happen to any of us. Denis, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I think I'll start with the comment you just made that we're all more likely to go down than go up. And I'm not entirely sure that's true, but it's more true in the last little while than it has been in some time. Specifically in Canada in the last like 10 or so years, where we've economically flatlined in a lot of ways. The mismanagement of housing policy has played a significant role in this. And so now what we see, and there's a lot of background here, but I think something that's important to understand is that when you attempt to model politics in a society that's stagnating or getting poorer, the political conversations and the questions about uh, um, how you manage the common good, how you tax, who gets services, those get really, really ugly really fast. Right? If you're in a society that gets poorer and you have an aging population, how do you handle delivery of healthcare services? Right? People are deeply uncomfortable about MAID and how that's being distributed now. And I don't want to get into that conversation, but it's just an illustration of how politically tough and ugly the zero sum conversations get when you're in a society that's not growing. And the reason that I think housing policy is so important, and the reason that I think building more housing is so important, is that the evidence that not only does that provide more opportunity for young people, more affordability, so that they're not as at risk in this kind of like economic stagnating situation, but it also fixes the economic stagnation itself. That building more housing close to jobs creates more economic opportunity. Making housing less expensive by building more of it frees up money for more business investment, which then can drive the economy and create more jobs. Freeing up young people's financial situation so that they're more able or willing to take a risk and start a business turns into, or build their human capital by going to school. These sorts of things are what turn that engine around and put us on an upward trajectory where now we're talking about, okay, who gets a little bit more, who gets a lot more, rather than who treads water and who sinks. And that political conversation is just easier to have, because if everybody's doing better, then they're much less suspicious of the people who are doing really well. But if you're in a stagnating situation, the question of like who gets to tread water gets really ugly really fast. And I think that that's part of what we're seeing now.
Yeah. Yeah. Biz, we have been doing a lot of yapping. What do you have?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a really strong correlation. But I do want to show some respect. I think it was actually on the first day for some of the old timers out there that respect the fact that Calgary is changing, and that some change can actually be okay. There was a guy from Hillhurst or West Hillhurst, one of the two communities, and he said, "My community character has already changed a lot." And he named specifically, we used to have tradespeople and janitors and people doing the work in the laundromats, and now we have project managers and surgeons and professors, right? And we've lost that diversity of opinion and diversity of thought in the neighborhood. And a lot of neighborhoods have lost their kids. We haven't built the opportunities for those people when they grow up to build their families inside the same neighborhoods they grew up in. So they go elsewhere. And for decades, we've had near 100% growth on the fringes and 0% growth on the inside, and it's only starting to trend back in. So people say they want to protect their neighborhood character. Maybe RCG could be part of that, right? And so I love, we kind of brought it up a little bit earlier, DJ Kelly bringing up the, pointed question to people, okay, if not this, then what? Your neighborhood is this far below its benchmark. How do we get back there? And I think that really helps to reframe the conversation for people, because so many people are used to just not here, not this, not here. Just, especially when you have to show up to a public hearing where the only options are yes and no or unsure. It's a complex discussion that's being funneled into community engagement. That's a total farce, right? It's a ceremony. And so, yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to DJ Kelly there for being able to bring that back and frame it in a more positive way.
Yeah.
And encourage people who are anti-housing to at least think about what it would mean to actually care about the housing system in their city.
Yeah, and notably, household sizes are different too, right? Like it's not just that these kids have grown up, but any families that replace those older families, they're smaller, or they have a different makeup, or they look different, or like things have changed. The character of the neighborhood has changed already. And I think that's really important to know. But you bring up DJ Kelly. Let's jump into talking about our new city council. Do we have any impressions so far of who we like as a counselor, who we're worried about, who we think might do well? I'll start with Hanita. I'm really curious what you think.
to be honest, I'm probably not as well versed with this council as the previous council. I'm a titch turned off. I'm a brown woman. When I was in the room, on that horseshoe, it's a bunch of white faces staring at me. And honestly, they're not the kind of people that I think would want to have a conversation with me. Or, the sense that I get is they would snicker at the things that I said. And I'm pretty sure I saw some of that yesterday as I was speaking. I don't know.
Yeah.
Doesn't give me
Not
a
a
lot of
great
optimism.
impression. Yeah. Yeah. Denis.
Yeah, so I have a different impression than Hanita, but I actually want to. I see where her impression is coming from, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I think there are a couple of counselors who see the political hearing, the hearing process as a political process, as an opportunity to make sound bites, dunk on their opponents, chuckle about them, and post about it on Twitter. And I think that's extremely unhealthy for what the public hearing is supposed to be, which is a public discussion, an opportunity for council to hear from all Calgarians. And I hope that. And Mayor Farkas is in a difficult spot here because the reality is he doesn't have control of his council. There's a block of right-wing councillors who don't necessarily agree with him or like him, and he is having difficulty getting them into line or forging a coalition to get to 8 so he can get things done. And so, irritating them by trying to rein in their incivil behavior is he has to balance that against, his need to actually accomplish things. So that's an ugly position to be in. But it doesn't, mean I think it's acceptable those couple of councillors behave in that kind of toxic and uncivil way. But I'd also say that, there are councillors, and I would point to Landon Johnston as somebody of this. Landon Johnston is somebody who has a very specific personal and professional background, and as far as I can tell, is making a good faith effort to extend his understanding of people who he doesn't necessarily have experience with. And I don't think he's going to vote the way that anybody in this chat likes most of the time. But, not everybody's going to do that. And what I see from Johnston so far is an earnest attempt to kind of grow his understanding of what's going on. And the way I wanted to answer this question, so basically how much do I like a counselor is how good they are in voting for housing. That's how much I like a counselor. So I want instead to talk about counselors that I think are overperforming in terms of their general execution of their duties with, versus the baseline of where I thought they were at. And the names that jump out to me so far are Jennifer Winus, Landon Johnston, and John Pantasopoulos. And John Pantasopoulos, the counselor for Ward 6, he ran on an explicitly an extreme anti-housing platform. I managed the campaign of one of his opponents in Omtasia, and I was obviously not happy when John got elected. John has a reputation of being a smart, hardworking, serious person, and that's from a variety of different sources, including political opponents of his that have worked with him on boards, and I think he's bringing that to council. And I think he's showing some indications that he understands and is willing to look for some compromise on the housing file. So that's been a pleasant surprise. Also, just his constituents report that his communications and clarity from his office is just, it's like a high functioning organization, and they're happy with it from what I hear. So I think that's good. That's good news, and that's that somebody's overperforming. I think I already described the way in which I think Landon Johnston's overperforming. There's that kind of working class populism can go in an incredibly ugly direction, and I don't think he's taken it that way. I think he's been a lot more earnest and tried to work in the right direction a lot more than many people would have anticipated. I still don't think he's going to be I don't think I'm going to agree with his council votes most of the time, but I think you should recognize when somebody's behaving in that appropriate civic minded way, as far as I can tell so far. And then the last one is Jennifer Winus. She got a lot of criticism last council for being a bit all over the place, and she's now a second term councillor, and I'm seeing some indications that it's starting to show. that she did actually learn a lot in that 4 years, and she's just becoming a more sophisticated thinker and actor in the policy sphere. And I think that those are initial glimmers, and I would like to see them grow into, like, to become much more robust, and hopefully they do, right? Because she did not have a good reputation in some circles for her like level of sophistication and clarity on policy files. And if that turns around, that's just good news for people in Ward 2 and good news for Calgarians.
Yeah, yeah. I think earnest is a good way to describe Landon Johnston.
Yeah.
And he is a little bit to Mayor Farkas the way Councillor Farkas was to Naheed Nenshi. So I look forward to their future CBC podcast together. It'll be beautiful. Biz, what are your thoughts?
I'm actually interested to hear a little bit more about Denise' take on Councillor Winus, because I've been really quite disappointed in her in that she almost tried to scrap the housing strategy office just to save like a couple peanuts on the budget, while totally killing our non-market's ability to find the grants that they need. Thankfully, it didn't happen. And she was also the one championing the motion to essentially make RCG a useless zone even after it gets repealed. And not even in a trade-off way. Like, she explicitly said, after it gets repealed, we need to fix it by making it functionally useless. And so I was really, really disappointed in that position from her, and I'm really glad that we've seen some pushback against that specifically. Like, if you're gonna get rid of RCG, I prefer you don't. But if you're don't make it bad on top of that, right? Because then that's gonna make that the unintended consequences. You're gonna deal with even denser redevelopment in the future. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that. Okay, well, what comes after this piece yet? And I agree with John P. That the assessment of John Pantazopoulos is that he seems earnest about wanting to actually get this replacement in gear and trying to ask questions of people to figure out what that would look like. But I see where Walcott is coming from yesterday, where he says, look, wouldn't it be great if we did all those things? For sure. We tried that. And some of you voted against it. And so I think we should definitely be reaching out to some of the John P's and the Landon Johnstons on council and say, hey, I know that you care about this, or at least you seem to, right? And you seem to be sort of coded in the more sort of conservative way where you're saying, yeah, let's do these LAPs and let's do the more community engagement and stuff. Go up to the people who then vote against these things and say, what the hell, man? This makes us look like total buffoons. It makes us look unserious when we have absolutely no plan for replacement and we just keep saying that we do. Like, the being ingenuine is the thing that frustrates me the most, is you get to come up with excuses of, oh, well, what if we were just doing this instead? But then those people vote against it anyway. Farkas brought forward, alongside Nathaniel Schmidt, pretty incredible replacement skeleton, at least. Like, here's the list of things that we need to be accomplishing in a replacement plan, no matter what that ends up being. He didn't have 7 friends to vote alongside him, so died on the vine. And I think we really need to be holding our council account to that. Is you said that you're going to replace this. If you're not showing me that you're fundamentally serious about that, then, like, what are we doing here? Right? Do you understand what a catastrophe it would be for you to just go back to blanket downzoning?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, like what we had before was not working.
Yeah. And it's worse than that because they're actually going to gut some of the suite provisions. So it's in some ways it's going to be worse than in a couple of significant ways around the availability of suites. It's going to be worse than what we had in 2024, right before they implemented open zoning. So yeah, I didn't know the piece about the housing office biz with Winess, and I'm aware of her like, I think the RCG motion. I'm still unclear how much of the gutting RCG motion was political miscalculation on the part of Winess and Atkinson, and how much of it was kind of targeted NIMBYism. Like, I've been trying to figure that out. Mike Atkinson's office won't talk to me, and I don't have any connection to Jennifer Winess, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Jennifer Winess is deeply suspicious of the bureaucracy. She thinks that they lied to her. She's like said that in open council. That's not, kind of like internal, and she's probably right. Administration, the kind of the charitable version of this is that administration has dealt with some extreme dysfunction in the council chamber for some time now, and so they're they're just like very cautious and like almost avoidant with counselors. And the less charitable version of this is that admin is aware that council is in chaos, and so they know they can get away with a lot more, and they do. I don't know where we are on that spectrum. I expect it's like a little bit of both, but I have a certain amount of sympathy for Jennifer Winess's frustration with admin and her desire to, basically kneecap them in some cases. The administration very clearly needs to be massively reformed, and I don't know. I'm not even sure where you begin, and I'm not sure councillors know where to start. They seem to be unwilling to fire Duckworth. I don't have a view on whether or not you should fire Duckworth, but they were unwilling to pull the trigger, despite the fact that they're all very clear, or a clear majority of them are explicit and public that administration needs to be reformed. And so it's just a really hard question. And what exactly Juanes thought she was doing at the housing office, I don't know. The other thing is Winess is a suburban councillor, and so part of the way she sees this is the donut is kind of leeching off her communities, and so I don't think her goals are actually like let's make housing better. Her goals are let's make the donut pay their fair share of taxes so my constituents stop getting fleeced. And that's not necessarily like the number one priority I have. I just like want to have like a really economically efficient, high growth, awesome city, and I think part of that is like more kind of tax efficiency and appropriate tax alignment. That's an important piece of the picture. But I think for Winess, it's like the just that tax efficiency piece, so her constituents aren't getting fleeced, is kind of the end goal in itself, and that leads to some gaps in priorities where she doesn't care if she throws certain things under the bus.
Yeah. Speaking of taxes and everything else, I think the counselor who has been, in my mind, the greatest disappointment is Councillor Chabot. He has been there for a long time, and he constantly, every time a young person comes up and is like, "Hey, like this is a problem. We have to pay for all of this maintenance, right?" He does this thing where he seems to think he's got a gotcha question. And I thought there were a couple young guys who responded really, really well to Chabot's questioning yesterday, where they just stonewalled him. He says, well, the new suburbs are paying for themselves. And they're like, okay, awesome. What about maintenance? And he's like, well, that doesn't come for 50 years. And they're like, okay. Like I don't know what you want to say. I'll still be paying my taxes in 50 years, right? Like that still has to get paid for. Biz, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it was Alex McCall in the live chat the other day had kind of because Andre Chabot's just bringing this up over and over again, and even if it is true that these communities pay for themselves with maintenance, right, which I have actually heard is the case for a handful of new communities, because we're building them to a better spec. Yes. We're building them with an incredible amount of density. You should look at a population density map of Calgary if you get the chance. Literally downtown and like Saddletown are about the same color, which is insane. Most of that's household size, right? But still, why don't we allow that same kind of development pattern to be happening in the inner city? Because it's true, right? The math is you have fewer people spread out over more space. That means that you have more land that needs more infrastructure and fewer people to pay for that infrastructure. Duh. That's basic math. There's no politics involved with that. I've heard Chabot say, well, what city are you looking at that gets that data, that you get that data from? And I'm like, I don't know, numbers, right? So Calgary at least has kind of started to tweak our development process after the MDP to be able to at least stop the bleeding on that when we do our developing area growth, that it is more sustainable than it has been for the last decades. But what about those communities for the last decades that are just sitting there and rotting, right? And we ask ourselves, we develop all these homes at the same time, all the people are aging at the same time. And that's, again, I think Anita's kind of touched on this before, is like, what do we think is going to happen? These are like basic geographical trends. You can't just, like, policy obviously plays a huge role in it, in constraining or making things more painful or not. but you're not going to be able to stop development in your neighborhood if most of the houses are falling apart at the same time and most of the people are aging out at the same time. Either you're going to do it a way that addresses people with dignity and gets the results we need now, or it's going to all happen in a more constrained and more forceful way later.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Hanita, we've been yapping a lot. I want to hear from you. What are you thinking as we've gone throughout this chat here?
Are we going to talk about Courtney Walcott?
Oh yeah,
Go for it.
we never really did. Yeah, start us off.
So I'm just going to give it from my perspective. So I deliver my 5 minutes, and then as I go, no one asked me any questions. I was prepared in case they did. But they're not going to go down the human rights path, it seems. And then as I was going back to my seat, I saw Courtney, gave him a little smile. I didn't know that he was coming after me. So it was really nice to hear Courtney, because I'm coming at it from just like, I'm just a normal citizen in the city. And he came in there with his experience and just schooled everybody in the room. And I felt like backed up some of the statements that I said, which was really nice. And I thought that was like, if we could have had those fire things that they have at the Flames games, like that should have gone off when Courtney did his presentation. I mean, it was phenomenal. And it also showed how fresh the council was, because they didn't know so much stuff. And from the questions that they were asking, like, oh boy, there's some real gaps in how council works, in their knowledge. It was a bit frightening.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad Courtney was there and he was able to field the questions well. It's always nice when you get somebody up there who can field those questions and actually manage that conversation. Biz, go ahead.
Yeah, this'll wrap around. But if you've ever been to therapy, you've maybe heard of non-attachment. I think it's important to remember that even if we get rid of RCG entirely, we'll be okay, right? We'll figure out some way to address the problems that we're dealing with. It'll be okay. It'll suck, but we'll get through it. But I think it's important that Walcott tried to reframe this for the councillors as this is a conversation about a policy environment. This is not about actual development outcomes, because we've only actually seen like 64 completions on the ground since in the 18 months that we've had rezoning, right? Yep. So all the people who are coming and they're telling you, oh, it's totally destroyed my neighborhood. It's fundamentally changed. Are you sure? Seriously? Oh, there's been 4 on my block and some of them have 18 units. Okay, but there's literally not a single block in the city that's had more than like 2 or 3. So yeah. I think people have really started to tie development and zoning up in their heads. And this has become a hearing where people can air out their grievances about development in general. And they're forgetting that if they get rid of this, it just puts more pressure on more radical types of development in their neighborhood in the future. And so I really appreciated Walcott saying, look, the policy environment itself, without even having to put a single unit on the ground, has released the pressure from the entire housing market system, because people are smart. They know how much this stuff costs. They know how much a rezoning costs, and so they're able to distribute that cost across the entire city instead of constraining it, right? You have 100,000 people that come and live here in a year, and you say, here's your little piece of land where you have to fit 100,000 people. What do you think is going to happen to the land value? It's obvious. I think about peanut butter. Right? People are asking, well, why don't we do this in, the nodes and corridors, and why don't we just take a whole bunch of process to pick the specific places where density should go? Okay, but we need flexibility, right? You need to spread those impacts really, really wide, and that's why we've been so successful, only having 2, I think, DPs that have required infrastructure upgrades since rezoning in terms of the RCGs. 2, right? So we talk about infrastructure capacity. That's being addressed through this. We're building up tax base without actually needing to, as a result of this increased development, upgrade too much infrastructure.
Yeah. I'm going to give each of you one last thought, and then we got to wrap this puppy up. Denis, we'll start with you, then Hanita, then Biz, and then we'll wrap her up.
Yeah, so okay, I'm going to sneak 2 thoughts in. Going to be a bit of a monster. Really quick on Chabot. I think there's some question about whether Chabot is a process nerd or is a process abuser. And it's clear that he's a process abuser from the last 2 days of hearings, that he is using his knowledge of the rules and the uncertainty that other people have around the rules to dishonestly engage. And the starkest moment was when he pretended with one speaker that you were going to get the same number of suites on an RC1 lot versus an RCG lot. And it's like, no, 2 and 4 are different numbers, Councillor Chabot. You either know this or you need to retire, and you should not be abusing the process to lie about this in open council. It was just completely morally unacceptable behavior. And for me, there was an open question up until Monday about whether Chabot was like a cantankerous old process nerd, or whether he was, kind of gaming the system to push his side. And it's very clear for me where it lands. And I don't think that that's morally acceptable behavior, and I don't think that's the behavior of a good or serious public servant. And so I was deeply disappointed to see that. And I think it's an indication that he's been around too long. It's time for him to retire. He's no longer able to discipline himself to engage honestly in the process. That was quite striking to me. And the other thing I'll say is that I agree that the conflation of RCG zoning with all development that Biz talked about, that Courtney Walcott talked about, that Hanita was talking about earlier, is a serious part of this discussion. And I don't really know how to get that across, because I think most people honestly conflate it, and a small number of people dishonestly and deliberately conflate it. And it's a very complicated thing to go through the 80-something zones and explain to somebody, well, no, this is actually what's going on here. You can't have that conversation with all 1.8 million Calgarians. It's just not possible. So I think that's just going to be an ongoing challenge for anybody who wants to get housing built, is that there's that opening to be dishonest about what's happening, and that the anti-housing people are gonna hammer that opening.
Are we gonna choose a councillor to vote off the island?
That'll be next episode. Hanita.
Housing is a human right. What kind of city are we going to be? Are we going to be a city that acknowledges that and provides a place for people to live? Or are we going to continue to deny? Well, we cannot continue. Are we going to go back in time and deny people the right to housing?
And Biz, you can wrap us up here.
I think you can really feel that, right? I think I'm really starting to, I don't know if you guys agree, you can feel what it means for 500,000 Calgarians to have come lived here since I graduated high school. I'm walking out of the library and I see a train start to head south, and then I hear next train for Somerset Bridlewood. And I'm like, didn't one just leave? And then another one comes. Like, we're almost there. We're like, yes, we're almost a big city with big city amenities, right? But we're still having this embarrassing conversation about if we should do that or not. And we don't really get to choose. I think it's important to kind of go back and watch what Walcott did. Watch what a master politician does in these, if he wants to go back into politics someday. But reframing things like, well, isn't it all the immigrants' fault, to, hey, don't you care about construction labor? Or talking with Chabot directly, hey, you want to do this through LAPs, but don't you vote against those anyway? And you're talking about transit-oriented development that you vote against. And so I think if I were to give a piece of advice to folks, try to have a really strong call to action when you speak to council. I am starting to come around to this idea of, if we're not going to do this through like citywide rezoning, we at least need some kind of baseline flexibility that every neighborhood has, and maybe that looks like RC2, and maybe through the LAPs that we do so much work in, right, already to establish where certain types of density can go in the city. Maybe we start using those to actually put the high density forms that we know that we need in conjunction with all of this. We start putting those into the map in our zoning so that we can detach the idea of zoning from the idea of development. Maybe we should start actually, if we don't do it through just the one low density base zone, really start talking about how do we as a city proactively create through our policy environment the type of city that we know that we're becoming. But again, I totally understand Walcott when he said, we tried that and now we're here.
Awesome. Thanks for wrapping us up. I got a bus to catch, so this is going to be it. Thanks, guys, and remember who you are.